kids. And two, my voice kind of wanes in and out, so if you don't hear something, I'm only going to talk for like a few minutes. So for those of you that are new, welcome. For those of you that have come before, welcome. A couple things. I'm Angela Timponi-Gowans. I'm the co-LPA president, and I have Dylan, who is a freshman here and has been here since 3rd grade. So, and I'll do introductions in a minute. I have a couple just housekeeping things. If you need to leave, use the bathroom, get more coffee, please feel free to take care of your needs. We are very flexible. So that's number one. Number two, we are live streaming eventually. I don't know if we're on right now, but we are? Okay. Hello. We are live streaming. So you've heard me say this a million times, so I'm going to say it one more time because we all need reminders. We have no control of we only send the link out to our families, current families, but we have no control where that goes. So privacy is a huge thing that I really think is important, and we can't control that. So I'd say personal stories or anything of such, just be very careful. And I kind of monitor, so don't get mad at me. I might say, hey, let's do that now because we all want to share and we all want to talk. But I really do not want information out there that shouldn't be out there. So anyway, there's a ground rule. I wanted to thank everyone that helped out or brought something or contributed in some way to the Valentine's Day. The Valentine's Day ice cream scoops here at the high school and at EMS because they were just fabulous and it's so much fun. And if you didn't get to participate, please do next year. My next little thing is teacher appreciation. At EMS, it's March 20th, and we need baskets. It's really important. So every year we put together, we're from Vermont, so we put together like a Vermont basket. So it doesn't need to be like totally elaborate, but the teachers love them. Someone's done like a beach basket, some wine, we do like a beer one from Vermont with some maple syrup and such. So if we are looking for baskets, we're desperate, and we're also looking for donations for Amazon gift cards. Danielle sent a link around to EMS families because the high school is in May. So all the high school parents here are probably like, what? But EMS, we are desperately in need of cash for Amazon cards and basket donation. Is that good?
Yes.
Okay, I got it. I have my list because that's fine. Take care of your stuff. Don't worry. Just, on March 31st, we are having anxiety in students with language-based learning disabilities. Here, it's mostly geared towards high school students. It's an evening event. Please come. I think this is something that definitely our students have some anxiety about, school performance or whatever. They have some anxiety around where they were previously. So it's a good discussion. We did this a couple years ago, and it really was robust. So I would say come to that. Okay, so the beginning of every meeting, there's a couple more announcements before I do introductions. Making waves.
Sure. Hi everyone, good morning. My name is Danielle Figuera. Thank you for being here. We just want to plug some of our fundraising events that are coming up. Our biggest, what we call parent fundraiser of the year is, just mostly parents attend, is Making Waves, which is April 15th. Our big act this year is Made the Staples. We've got some information up here about that. And tickets go on sale Monday, and you'll get that email sometime on Monday. So we do hope that you will share and participate in that with us. We're really looking forward to that.
It's always a super fun event. There's a reception beforehand, busy, amazing theater.
It's a great event if you haven't been before, and just so you know, for our EMS families, we do it on that Wednesday night prior to high school parents' days, because many of our high school parents are traveling in from out of town, and they make a bit of a weekend of it. So that's sort of the reason why it's midweek in Rockport, which seems inconvenient for a lot of people, but we're doing our best to adhere to our families and make sure that they are able to come and join us. So that event is coming up. We'll be asking for your support. We have great raffle items and silent auction items coming this year, so this is going to be a big one. We hope you will join us. And you'll be receiving other emails and information about events this spring. Feel free to reach out to anyone on my team if you have questions about that. We'd love for you to participate in any way that's meaningful for you, and it's a great opportunity for the community.
Danielle, can I just chime in real quick?
Yes.
Hi everyone, I'm Katie Mullen, Director of Annual Giving. I oversee our large fundraising events. We are actively still seeking sponsorships. If you, as a family, want to sponsor this event, or if you have a business or work for a company that is philanthropic, we welcome those opportunities. I would be happy to talk to you about those. Sponsorships are gifts to our annual giving program, the Landmark Fund. Come with fantastic first 5-row tickets, access to the reception above hand, signed Mavis Staples swag, all that fun stuff. So if you're interested in that, please be in touch. And then we also will be sending out information about our golf tournament, which is in the beginning of June. Very similar, we look for sponsorships to support that event, and it's a really great day out in Ipswich Country Club. So you'll be hearing from us for all of those things and more.
Thank you, Katie.
Yep.
So every LPA beginning of our events, I don't call them meetings because 10 minutes maybe, I think I'm down to 7, is just like our meeting, just updates. And then we really offer an opportunity for parents to have parent education. One of the things that we start out with is introduction, so we connect our families. So everyone goes around the room, if you haven't been here before, and says who they are, who their kid is, what grade, how long they've been here, and what town, because sometimes we need to connect for rides or hangouts or play dates, whatever. So I will start. I'm Angela Timponi Gowans. I'm Dylan, who's a freshman at the high school. He's been here since 3rd grade. We are from Montpelier, Vermont, but we have a house here so that he can go to school here. Danielle, you want to go second?
Sure. I'm Danielle. I've been at Landmark 3 years. I'm the Director of Alumni and Parent Engagement. I work on the advancement team.
Kate Rennie. I have Miles, who's a senior, and he's been here since he was a freshman.
Great.
Marblehead.
Marblehead. Awesome. Tristan, you want to go? This is my oldest son, Tristan. He's on school break. Senior. He's got into Bard College with a significant scholarship, merit scholarship.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Did I introduce you well enough?
Yeah, sure.
Jackie, you want to go?
I'm Jackie Gardner. I have Tegan, who's a freshman. We've been here since 6th grade, and I live right down the road.
Welcome.
Hi, I'm Christy Willington. I am here with Jackie. I have a first grader in public school who spends dyslexia outside of the school. So I'm here to listen and learn.
Welcome. We love it. Delphine.
I'm Delphina. I have Solemino. She's a freshman here. We've been at Landmark for 7 years. So we have a membership.
We have a 7-year group going here.
Yeah,
You'll hear that over and over.
there. And we're happy here.
Hi, I'm Sarah Cho. I have Coric in 2nd grade, and we live in Beverly Farms.
Great. Lisa, you want to jump in?
Sure. I'm Lisa Castellucci, live on Gloucester, and I have a son that's a junior here, Josiah. He's been here since 5th grade, and I have a son, Isaiah, that graduated last year from here.
And is in college. Doing successfully? Okay.
Kaylin Fawcett. I have a son who's in 6th grade. He started at 4th grade here, and I live over in Winter.
Hi, my name is Linda D'Addario. My son, Johnny, this is his 3rd year here at Landmark. And we live in Topsfield, and I'm really happy to be here. I've met some very good friends here, and just a wonderful place. We're really happy, so it's nice to meet you all.
I'm Catherine Bottarelli. I have a sixth grader, Paige, and a freshman, Julia, and we live in
New. Chicago, via Chicago.
My name's Meg Cashel. Tucker is in 4th grade, and this is his 2nd year here, and we live in Marblehead.
Thanks.
Sue Kluber, Summer O'Sullivan is a freshman here. It's her first year.
Welcome.
Yeah.
And you're from
Holliston, which nobody knows about, but if you like chickens, it's the place to be.
Welcome.
My name is Debbie Pino. My daughter Valentina is in 5th grade here, her first year, and we're commuting from Somerville, so it's been great. So she's been doing really well. So
Good.
happy to be here.
Welcome.
I'll speak for both of us. This is Rick. My name is Amy. My son is junior here. It's his first year, and we are very grateful to have been accepted, and he really has, it's been life-changing for him in just the few months he's been here. So, and we're from Beverly.
My name's Lucy, and my daughter Nuala is in 5th grade, and this is her 3rd year, and we're in Manchester.
My name's Kim Booker. I have 2 boys that both started this year. One in 5th and so Liam in 5th and Jackson in 7th. And we live on the South Shore in Hanover.
Wow.
nice.
Commute.
It's not bad, actually.
Welcome.
So I'm Genevieve Cross. My daughter Sarah Cross goes to Landmark. She's in the 9th grade, and this is our first year, and I agree with everybody else's comments that it has been life-changing.
Good.
And it's so positive to see her actually be excited about going to school again.
That's awesome.
My name is Melissa Bemis, and I have a recently diagnosed 6-year-old, so I'm just kind of fact-finding and researching, trying to figure out what we need to do.
Welcome. Michelle, you want to?
Sure, absolutely. My name is Michelle Gurnice. I work here with Katie and Danielle. I'm the Director of Advancement here for the school, so oversee all of our LPA activities, alumni events, fundraising, and general just sort of getting out there. So it's really nice to see you all. I know many of you, but it's nice to see some new faces too. So, and welcome. You are most welcome here. So glad you're here. So.
We are welcoming.
Hi, I'm Bob Gowans. Dylan, there was a freshman, and I primarily live in Vermont with Tristan.
It's a little bit complicated.
And when Tristan and I left yesterday afternoon to come down here, it was snowing very hard, and the snow is right now about halfway up our kitchen windows. So,
so they're really glad to be here. At our house here, there's no snow.
And I'm excited that there's no
No shoveling for me.
Yeah.
There's a lot of snow in Vermont. We got a lot yesterday. So
yeah.
Hi again, Katie Mullen. I work in our advancement office, director of our annual fund. I have been here 7+ years.
Yeah.
7, yeah.
You came the same,
yeah,
you're in the
right.
7 club.
Yes,
right
we
here.
are.
Yeah.
First year together. Thank you and welcome. Happy you're all here.
Amanda, you're in the 7 club, aren't you?
I don't know.
She's lost all track.
So I'm Amanda
6 club?
Yeah.
You're in the 6 club, sorry.
I have Jack, who is a 9th grader, and he started at Landmark in the 4th grade, and then I have Ellie, who is a senior, God help me, and she started here in the 10th grade. So they're both on the same campus, and we're grateful.
Yeah, same class. But you're
Newburyport. Yes, yes, and I brought my friend.
Okay, everybody, we like friends.
I'm Jessica Stanton. I'm from Wellesley, Mass. I have 2 students, actually, one a senior at St. Sebastian's and a daughter at Dana Hall. And I'm really happy to be here and hear what you guys are all up to.
Yeah. Welcome.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Courtney Stevenson. I have a daughter, Catherine, in the 11th grade. And this is our 2nd year. We're living in Manchester via Princeton, New Jersey.
Trying to figure it out.
Hi, I'm Melody O'Neill. My son Aaron is a new 6th grader this year at EMS. He did a number of summers prior though. And my daughter, who is now a freshman at Beverly High, doing very well in all honors classes, getting straight A's, did 4 summers here. So she's doing great. And I'm also the associate admission director. So I've been associated with Landmark for, this is my 25th year.
Yeah. Mel, I was gonna add all that.
Yeah, you live
I'm
in Beverly, sorry.
I live in Beverly too. I also work at Landmark with all these wonderful ladies. I've only been here a year and a half, so I'm a big time newbie compared to everybody else. But I'm the director of leadership giving.
And we skipped the philo row.
What? The philo row? What? How did that happen? See? Cold virus, executive functioning, I can really, it's compromised. I really can like.
I'm Suzanne Velo. I have a son. He's in 9th grade, Dylan, and he's been here since 7th grade. And I live from Derry, New Hampshire.
My name's Renee Shrest. I have a 7th grader named Marriott, and we live in Windham, New Hampshire, and this is our 4th week in school.
4th week. Welcome. What grade? I'm sorry.
7th grade.
7th grade. So all over the EMS campus. How's the transition?
Wonderful.
Great. Awesome.
And I'm Maureen Palmer. I have Cole, who is a junior. It's our 2nd year here, and really settled in now. It's going well. We just moved from Weston to Boston, so 10 minutes closer.
That's right. Last time we were talking, you were moving. So good. I'm sorry I missed your whole bill. So why we're really here is because part of our mission is, or really our main mission, is parent education. And so we have invited, and Dr. John
And any version's fine, thank you.
He's here to talk about the reading brain, and we're so grateful because his team at MIT really has been studying. Some of our kids, Dylan did a study at MIT a number of years ago when he was at UMass. So I am really grateful. Thank you for coming, and I'm going to turn it over to you. And again, remember, we're on live stream.
So good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. You know, I began my studies of brain differences in children who struggle to read before I became a parent. It's really, although my science I don't think has shifted, my feelings have shifted about what it is to be a parent who cares for your child and what it is to find a school that helps your child in the right way. So I'm a huge fan of Landmark because as we went through the room and I heard so many parents and students touch their lives in very profound ways. And you know, the only thing I would add is I wish every kid had a Landmark school in their lives because you know, different kids need different things, but so many kids need more than many schools can do. And so I'm really, and I'm also grateful that Landmark has partnered with us on several research projects. One of the ones we're still scoring up, which were they very kind to let us come here and try to ask whether if you play with displays on electronic devices, the spacing of the letters, the spacing of the lines, whether that can facilitate the ease of reading for individually for students that we're exploring whether that is. It would be really amazing if technology, which often seems the enemy of education, kids are engaged in TikTok when you wish they were doing their homework or hanging out with the family, right? That you know, technology could become more of a real partner to empower students in an individualized way. So I won't talk about that today, but I'm just grateful for the institution that I'm grateful to be here with you, and grateful for the many students and parents who contributed their time. We don't learn anything without the time and efforts that parents and students do to come and participate in our research, so I'm very grateful for that. I just have to wake up my computer. So we're going to talk a little bit about the reading brain and what we understand about that and how it differs for individuals.
Can I just ask you to speak up for the folks online?
Louder?
Yes.
Okay, sure. So I'm going to talk about the reading brain and how it differs in children who struggle with reading. So throughout my career, I've been fascinated by the fragile power of the human brain, right? The human brain endows us with a capacity for language, for thought, for communication, for feelings, for physical activity in the world, and for every power it has a sort of Achilles heel. So if we're able to pay attention, we can have difficulties in paying attention, like in ADHD. If we're able to have feelings, we can have anxiety or depression. If we're able to have thoughts, we can have thought disorders, schizophrenia. If the brain brilliantly invents how to make spoken language visible through print, right? Which is an incredible, I mean, it's hard even to imagine what a world was like before print, right? Where the only way you learned things was through spoken words from people next to you. And if they were any distance, you couldn't learn anything from them. If they were not alive anymore, you couldn't learn anything from them, right? So print is unbelievably empowering in many ways, but it's a recent cultural invention. Our brains, as you know, were not evolved to be readers, and maybe that's why there's so many children who are not a good fit with the print world that humans have invented. And so I think that infants are born into a sort of neurobiological lottery, that they are born with sets of genes and born into environments that will be easier or harder for them to navigate. And we know that many children struggle. The numbers are pretty broad in terms of estimates of how many children have dyslexia, but something about 10% is a good estimate. ADHD, the current estimates in the US are 10% or 11%. Autism, which used to be considered a very rare disorder, now it's 1 out of 42 boys, which is, it occurs more often in boys than girls, but it's a high number. And another thing which I think converges on this is poverty. In the U.S. also, where children often don't receive educational opportunities that are very helpful for their reading development. And so, you know, there's, in public schools, 1 out of 8 children receive some form of special education. So all of these things means there's a huge variety of children born with various strengths and various vulnerabilities, either in their genes or in their environments. And you know, we want as a society and as parents and the schools to have all these kids flourish as much as possible. And now we're able to understand something about the brain basis of some of these differences in children, the variety or variation, individual differences through brain imaging. This is our scanner at MIT, where I guess at least some children, students have participated, and we're able to generate these kinds of pictures. And I'll talk with you a little bit, and I'm more than happy to answer questions along the way of any kind. Is what have we learned about the reading brain, and how does it differ in children who struggle to read, and what are some possible implications from some aspects of education? So this is our pretend scanner for younger children. It's not a real scanner. It shakes like a scanner, because scanners shake a little bit, and it gives them a noise. And for younger children, it gets them comfortable before they go into the real device. So we try to make the visits as pleasant as possible. Obviously, children of different age. If you take somebody who is just going off to college, and put them in this machine is an insult. So we have to be age appropriate in how we partner with the students and their families. But you know, we try very hard to make it a good experience. And selfishly, it's good for us. If a person's happy, they're doing their best, and you know, we learn something. But we want to make it a good experience for parents and students who come. You know, some people say, well, how do kids like being in the scanner? You know, of course, we only see children and families who choose to come. We don't run into playgrounds, grab children, and whisk them off to a brain imaging center and see what happens. But I can tell you that for the vast majority of children who come, you know, it's a reasonably positive experience and not troubling. So here's a spontaneous note we got from a girl some years ago now, drawing the noisy scanner. So she says, "Can I do that again?" And she sends us a note: "You've let me have more fun in 3 days than I could have in any other place. Just think of it, I'm playing a game when at the same time I'm a research guinea pig. If you're a tough grader, you give a point or two off for spelling, but it's still pretty good. I'm doing tough words, right? And who knows, I might help someone else my age if they have any brain problems while still earning money. Families get a small stipend." And what do you think beats that? Nothing, right? It's the beautiful sentiment of a child, unfiltered. So I'm going to zip through things, but you stop me anytime you have a question or concern or a different perspective. You know, sometimes people will say, have you heard this idea that we only use 10% of our brain? Okay? Yeah. So I'm going to say 2 things about it. Number one, all of us have moments, I definitely do, when I'm feeling only 10% of my brain is operating, so I'm sympathetic in that way, and we all know people who we strongly suspect. Frequently use only 10% of the brain. But when it comes to reading, it is such a complex, amazing thing to read even single isolated words, which are the simplest step in reading, that when you see with this picture I'm about to show you of how much of the reading left hemisphere is engaged to read a single word, it tells you why there's so many ways in which it can go astray or be challenging. So this is a picture of, this is magnetoencephalography. It shows you moment-to-moment changes in brain activity. The details don't matter in this so much, but watch how the whole left hemisphere gets engaged in processing a single word. And, back of the brain, front of the brain, it's all going back and forth on in a half, about 3/4 of a second. Okay.
Amazing.
All right. For reading, there's vision to see the print. There's language to connect it to meaning and words you know. And every child learns to read through spoken language before they get to print, right? There's thinking and interpretation. By the time you go through that language, vision, thought, you've covered almost the entire cerebral cortex of the human brain, right? So there's so many things in reading, and it's not surprising there's so many ways it can be a challenge for individuals variably. And one interesting study did brain imaging like this, functional MRI, and they had people do 2 different things, or 3 different things. Well, they saw print only, just saw print, that's in blue, heard speech only, that's in green, and then they said which parts of the brain respond to both in adult typical readers. And you can see a lot of overlap, okay? So those are the areas that are spontaneously, when they just see print, or they just hear words, they're spontaneously relating them. Does that make sense? Okay. You see those little green areas of the auditory cortex with just for spoken language. In the back of the brain here, it's blue areas, that's just the visual areas. So some areas just do vision and audition, but everything in pink are areas that spontaneously in the adult reader put together print and sound of language. Is that okay? So the practice reader has all of that. And the striking thing is this is an average across English, Spanish, Chinese, and Hebrew, quite different language. It's a universal principle across various different forms of language that our brains learn to integrate spontaneously spoken words and printed words after we learn to read. And so we sort of think about a core reading network in the left hemisphere. It's in the left hemisphere because that's for almost everybody the dominant language or speech, and then print follows that into the language system. And the areas in the front of the brain and the superior and lower part of the back of the brain. And we will summarize sort of all the imaging studies in a cartoon that contrasts what happens for somebody who is a typical reader compared to a child for whom it's difficult, dyslexia. You see the following things. You see reduced responses in the posterior brain regions. That's the absence of those red spots. And you often see increased activation in this anterior area, Broca's area in the frontal cortex. We mostly interpret that as greater effort for somebody for whom reading is harder. And it's harder because the posterior regions of the brain that typically support that reading are not doing it as efficiently for some individuals. Again, because print is invented, our brains were not evolved to read. I mean, we created the world, right? That makes reading necessary. I suspect that ADHD is a bit of that story as well. We created a world where you have to sit in rooms like this, from pre-K until adulthood, but certainly all the way through formal education, for long periods paying attention. That's nothing like how children were prepared to live in nature for all of our evolution, right? Until a couple of thousand years ago, even a couple of hundred years ago, tons of jobs were outside jobs that had all kinds of different requirements, and you didn't have to sit there for long times in front of your computer monitor or in grouping sessions like this, right? So in many ways, we created worlds that are not not easy fits for many people. And again, this is a more formal summary of brain imaging studies showing in red this reduced activations in the posterior brain regions and these sometimes enhanced ones that we interpret as greater effort in frontal cortex. And this has been looked directly in children who are typical readers or children who struggle with reading. What they did in this is the same idea. They showed people letters or heard the sounds of language and then looked at what happens when you put them together, which is the essence of reading, right? There's spoken language to start with, there's print, and you somehow put them together when you learn to read. And in the top are fluent readers, and you can see a fair bit of orange in different spots. Those are the overlap regions, and there's much less orange for individuals for whom reading is difficult. It's not the spontaneous combination of print to language does not occur in the brain so easily as it does for other people. Now, how early are these differences? And this has become, I don't know if any of you follow some of the ridiculous discussions that occur on Twitter and other similar places on this point. You know, just recently there's some claim from somewhere that there is no such thing as dyslexia. Have you heard? Do you hear this periodically? No. Not here. No, not in my No, but it's very confusing to have somewhat serious grown-ups in places saying things like this. You know, it's very confusing. And so one of the best sources of evidence, although I think there's 1,000, you know, sometimes is the fact that we see differences way before in the brain, way before children start learning to read. So these kinds of studies typically will take children in families where there's a history of dyslexia. We know that it's not 100% at all, but it tends to run in families. And so they can do things like use these EEG caps, these electrodes in the skull, to look at even infants way before they enter pre-K or get any form of reading instruction or see a book, basically. And I'll just say very simply that when they do these kinds of EEG studies, they see differences in language responses, within weeks to months of birth. Now, not all those children will go on to reading difficulty. About half will, probably statistically. So you're probably even underestimating it for that half, because you can't tell for a 3-month-old if that particular child who comes from a family with a history of reading difficulty will struggle or not, right? So, but even at that level, brain differences are evident, in this case, within months of birth. So, yeah, well, it's a brain that has a difference. Everything I study is about brain differences, really. There's huge variety and individuality in brains, similarities at some levels and a huge individual variation. And it's just a brain difference. It just happens to be a difference that's a challenge in the way our educational system works. So let me tell you about another study we did where we looked at children about to enter kindergarten. So, and this is we looked at, I want to remind you that in the brain there's gray matter and white matter. Gray matter are the neurons, the cells of the brain. White matter are the myelinated axons. So each neuron sends out an axon that communicates to other neurons. That axon, if it goes any distance, is covered with a substance called myelin. That's the white matter of the brain. That makes the signal go quickly and accurately at a distance. It's like insulation for that signal. And there's a huge amount of white matter in the brain. The white matter is like the unsung hero of the brain because it's a super highway of communication. It's the 10G network of the brain, right? That's connecting things like vision and language and thought, which you put together when you read or think about things. We measure it. It's a bit of a cheat, so don't tell anybody that I've told you this, but I guess we're being recorded, so okay.
Secret's out.
Okay, all right. Okay, but
it's not going to go viral.
Okay, yeah. So we can't measure the white matter directly, for a person sitting in a scanner, but we can measure how water moves very small distances. So we're actually measuring the movement of water to infer the neural architecture of the white matter. And if you're water, like in cerebrospinal fluid, the fluid part of your brain, you can go wherever you want. If you're water that's near a bunch of axons traveling together, what people call it trapped, then you can't go through them any more than I could walk through that chair. You have to flow in parallel around that physical barrier if you're a molecule of water. So we measure where the water goes to construct an estimated map of the white matter pathways of the brain. And you end up with a picture like this. So what's shown in red are pathways we think connect the right and left hemisphere. What's shown in blue, things that go up and down in the brain. And in green, things that connect the front and back of the brain. And this is an individual brain of a person. And you can see that you're able to map out that individual person's brain. And then we can do statistical analyses to understand things about the property of an individual. And what we found many years ago is in adults with a history of dyslexia and ongoing challenges in reading, what looked to be reduced strength of connectivity of communication in the left posterior cortex. So exactly that same area that showed the reduced engagement to print, we're pretty much in that same region in the left hemisphere with reduced connectivity in areas which can, unlikely be a helpful thing in learning to read. And you can see a picture like this. This is individual people now. Each open circle is an adult who had a typical reading history. Each filled circle is an adult who struggled with reading. And you can see in this graph that the reading scores go this way, the strength of connectivity goes on the bottom. So, we don't know from this kind of a study whether that individual was a typical reader. Was she born with a brain that's suited for reading? Right? So it was easy for her. She arrived in first grade and said, give me Moby Dick, okay, I'm ready to go, okay. Or was she somebody who just did a lot of exercising of that ability to practice, reading War and Peace on the bus stop while everybody else was goofing off, okay? Because both things will matter, both genetic predispositions, that makes things easier or harder, but also experience has a huge effect on the brain. And we can't tell those apart. Sometimes people intuitively think if you see a biological difference, it's a genetic difference. But experience has an unbelievably huge effect on the brain, at home, at school, on social media these days as well. So you can't tell by looking in the brain whether a difference is based on genetic predispositions or based on experience. Both matter a lot. But we could ask, and when we see that difference in the brain, how much of it is due to experiential differences? So one thing that happens in the literature, on average, everything's average as I'm talking about today, individual children and families vary a lot, is that children who typically struggle with reading don't look to read out of school. I think that's for all of us. Things we're good at, we like doing, and things that are a struggle, we avoid unless we have to. It's just human nature. So the estimates, though, are fast. So we think it's a school thing. But one study looked at it and they said this is an amazing number, but it's, in 5th grade, a good reader may read as many words in 2 days as a poor reader does in a year. Wow. Okay? Wow. So it's this huge multiplicative effect because not only do people have to do what they do in school, right? Then they go home, there's weekends, there's holidays, there's evenings, right? And you can either find books, exciting and fun and enjoyable, or burden. So it's not. And so that reinforces what might be predisposition.
John, can I ask a quick question?
Absolutely.
And
yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, I'm good. Yeah.
I'm curious because we're talking about, and this population is very interested in younger people.
Yeah.
But I'm interested. Is it possible for that to go in the opposite direction as you get older? So say there's a strong reader when you're younger, but then is it possible for adults to, I don't know, either because they get out of the habit of it, or they cannot. Because
all they do is watch YouTube.
Right, exactly, and they're all on the social media or whatever. But can that sort of, those biological pathways that are strong or whatever, can they weaken?
So I haven't seen anything about that, but that's a great question,
Yeah.
because I just don't know the answer to that. That there is a lot of worry these days, generally for students, whether people are stopping reading, more societally, because of all the sort of more fun than reading stuff in terms of video content, and
Or you read like shorter
That's
pieces.
right, yeah.
Like I find myself because I read a lot for work,
it's an attention span thing.
Then I'll instead of reading a book, I read articles or newspaper or something shorter.
I have that same experience as well, these are really incredibly interesting society-wide questions about both individual differences in experience, but whether as a society we're transforming away from reading extended text and things like that because of all the other challenges and temptations we have so easily. And I don't have a good answer for that. And it's hard, honestly, to know some of these things at a societal level. From a scientific perspective, because we have no control who's left over. I don't know how to put it. We can't compare your brain, to a parent's brain and the grandparent's brain, right? Then we could say something like that. But because people have different ages, different cohorts, and sort of almost everybody's on devices.
Yeah. And I also find on the other flip side, not just reading but spelling. So a spell check. I don't have to activate and really think how to spell it because it starts spelling it, or I'll read it, I'll spell it wrong, and then it just changes it.
Yeah.
So I don't have to really. I feel like sometimes I'm lazy because I don't have to really practice that anymore. Right?
I think my spelling. I do think my spelling has deteriorated because of spell checks. Personally, because close is good enough, and then something will happen, right? These are great questions, and at the limit, 100 years from now, will nobody be reading? You know, it'll all be video things or little chips you get in your brain or whatever directly. You know, it could change dramatically. I mean, it's just like we didn't have print 5,000 years ago. 1,000 years from now, maybe we won't have print again. So yeah, these are all incredibly fascinating questions.
On the other side, what you're saying, is it possible for the kids that have been poor readers as they get older, and is there like a certain age where they kind of can't catch up, if they start reading more, will the brain look the same as maybe the people that have the genetic advantage? Can they catch up to a higher level of reading if they read more and they were a poor reader early on?
So this is going to be, there's so many different experiences on this. I would say more reading and practice on this, and I'll get to this in a few minutes. We think that students who make the most progress and through exposure to print and making support from teachers and families, I'll show you in a few minutes evidence that surprised us, that we think they get there quite a different way. You know, but it's the best way for them. And I think that's, you know, always when we're helping people with a difficulty of any kind, there's always these two versions of things, which is, do we make them like everybody else, you know, because we think that's what treatment or healing or education, or do people need a different way to go for themselves that fits with who they are and gets them, you know, the farthest that their goals can be, you know, in a different way. Is that, does that make sense? Yeah. And I'll, in 15 minutes, I'll show you. No, these are great questions. So obviously, so we looked at children the summer before and the beginning of kindergarten. So those are ages before they start. In Massachusetts, around November, kindergarten is when they start to begin to do formal reading of a kind. And we looked at a test of what you're probably used to, a test of phonological awareness. You can't; these kids are pre-readers. We can't test them on reading. But we, this is work with Nadine Gabb at Children's Hospital. But they can do a test like, you know, say the word bold, not take away the B and decompose that spoken word. And we know that this phonological awareness, the ability to manipulate the sounds of spoken language, is a critical ability to make reading easy. Right? And so we have these kinds of tests on these kids, and what we found is these children, prior to any reading instruction in school, so they're not infants now, but they're just arriving in school, the bigger their pathway, the stronger their pathway of the one area I just showed you, the better they are at these phonological tests. So, you know, that before the teacher gives his or her first lesson to this child, there's children with brains that are better, that are easier fits with reading or more difficult fits with reading before the first moment of instruction. So it's got to be the case that there are better and worse schools and better and worse teachers, but that difference is present prior to any educational experience at birth. So this is, you know, when people tell you, I know you don't believe this, but when there's arguments in society about like, is it just inadequate instruction? No, some children are different. All children are different actually, and they're predisposed to be good at some things and struggle in some other areas. And so this is an example of phonological awareness. The top one is a child who scored poorly on the test, and the bottom brain is one who scored well on the test. And we follow these children, and sure enough, the top one became a struggling reader in second grade, and the bottom one was an average or above average reader. So these predispositions are visible at birth or prior to reading instruction. And Nadine Gabb has gone even one more step, in exactly the same area of the brain. She's looked at infants using the same technology to look at white matter and shown differences again in children who are at familial risk for reading difficulty. Not all of them will develop it, but about half of them will over time. So there's a lot of conversion evidence that these brain differences are there from the first moment. And you know, they may be related to strengths of different kinds, you know, but for reading, they make it harder. Was there a hand? Yeah.
I was just curious, excuse me, if you could speak to what actually happens in the brain when you have a child who is always reads an assignment out loud. So like, what is actually, I think, okay, so my husband and I have 7 children. Our first 2 graduated and attend Landmark. We have one that's diagnosed dyslexic, but I see tendencies in all of them in different ways, right? So specifically thinking about the 14-year-old right now, she always reads out loud. And I'm curious what she's doing to compensate in the brain. Like, I'm wondering how that lights up and I'm sure other people, I'm asking this question because I'm thinking other people in this room are gonna relate with this question. You have to see ways that your kids compensate, right? So like, when they read out loud, there's something that's, I know there's something that's happening because she does what better.
It helps her.
It helps her somehow to compute it better in her brain. So I'm curious, actually, what's happening?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and I'm going to be embarrassed to tell you I do not know
Oh.
a good answer to that. You know, but I've heard it both ways. So I've heard it also. I was talking to another child at a different school, and she told me that when she has accommodated and made progress in her reading difficulty, that exactly the opposite thing happens. If she stops to read it out loud, it really messes her up.
Really?
Yeah. So and I'm not.
Really individualized, right?
So yeah, the reason I'm answering is I'm wondering whether it's just, and science is really bad at grasping true individual differences. I mean, it is really hard, and teachers and parents have to do that. They have one student at a time, one child at a time. But you know, we have these averages, and it's very hard for us to so I don't have an answer to that, and I think the individual differences thing is huge. You know, as to what works for different children. So I'm going to actually I'm going to jump to the end. This discussion because I feel like and then I'll go back if we have time. But I'd rather I want to hit the point I got to about the brain plasticity because. If you're, is that okay with you? Go. Flexible? No, I've had a ton of good questions, and I'd rather have less material and more discussion. Is that okay with you? All right. So I got this here. So let me talk about intervention and brain plasticity. You know, that's education and brain plasticity. Right? So I just want to remind you, there's very, very few studies. Education is a really tough thing to do randomized research around, right? So if you're involved in things like medications, you know that the way medication gets assessed, right, is it a randomized clinical trial where some patients get a placebo, some patients get the drug, and there's some kind of measure. Let's say if it's a medical thing by a clinician as to whether they improved or not, right? That kind of thing is very hard to pull off in education, right? Because no parent or school or teacher, you know, puts up his or her hand and says, "Can I be in the control group?" Right? Okay. Is that yeah, okay? So and furthermore, whereas most drugs have relatively short effects, relatively immediate effects. Education is a prolonged, continuous process. Also, so you can't do a 2-month version of something and call it a day. So it's really hard to do that kind of research in all of education, and I think that's one of the hugest challenges in improving educational outcomes for students is that we don't have much of a scientific method to understand what works and for whom. So there are great teachers, there are great parents, I think, who have really good intuitions about that and really good skills. But it's a huge obstacle. And so this is not to be gloomy for a moment, but the recent NAEP scores, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, if you have seen those, the last 10 years there's been zero progress in improving reading or math scores in the United States. Zero. For all the discussions you hear, you know, individual places vary, but on average. And not only that, for children who score in the lowest quartile, the bottom 25% sort of score on reading scores, so that will include children disproportionately really with reading difficulties and children from poverty, okay? Those scores have gone down. Okay, like a lot of things in our society, the kids at the top, they've gone up some. The kids in the bottom quarter in the last decade have gone down in reading performance and math performance. So, you know, we're really struggling to improve education.
To like the world though, like I mean, I saw those scores too, but I didn't have time to like look.
Yeah.
So has everyone stayed the same, or is there some other
worldwide?
countries? Yeah.
You know, I don't know the answer to that.
To look back at that.
But you know, it's amazing for all the discussions we have in the U.S. about this policy and that policy, and you know,
or this incentive, or putting money into education, or not putting money into.
Yeah. I mean, people figure out, you know, can we do a better job, and especially for those who are most vulnerable, maybe to not succeeding in a standard educational environment, and you know, there's been alarming little progress, and maybe because I'm a scientist, I think the answer is better science, but I think the answer is better science because. Otherwise, it's all sort of politics and intuitions, and you know, moments of the day. And anyway, so I'll just tell you, it's a tough thing to work on, evaluating whether particular educational approaches are effective or not. So we've done a few studies where we could, and one of them, and I'll tell you also, we have a number of different partners who provide us the reading instruction, and so I'm not promoting any one in particular. We like this model where we work with an entity that has, so we work with Linda Moodwell, this is scientific learning, because the deal we make with them is this, we'll evaluate objectively and independently what happens with your program, at least in our study, okay? It's up to you to make sure that it's delivered in a high quality way, right? Because they're motivated to do that, right? Because they have to live with the publications that come out, whether something failed or worked, right? And we don't want, and fidelity is a funny word for educational research, but it's a huge one. Because if the program is not delivered, any program is not delivered well by a teacher because they're not prepared or the material is not clear or whatever, then it's not that the program doesn't work, it's that it wasn't well supported on behalf of the teacher. Is that okay? So we like to partner with vendors, so to speak, who we say, like, you make sure that the teaching part is awesome, tell us everything that has to happen for the teaching part to be awesome. The teacher is supported, the materials, the instruction, the environment. So because they're motivated to do that, and then we independently do the measurement before and after and see what happens. So we did a study with Fast Forward Scientific Learning. I can tell you more about the general response to this, and maybe some of you have experienced this. And also, they have a thing that happens with many companies is they start with one product and then they end up with 12 products, and it gets a little hard to follow. But anyway, so they focused on rapid auditory processing as a step towards phonological awareness and reading. And with Charles Armstrong School, a school kind of like Landmark, in the San Francisco area. And so we saw children who were about age 10 and who were struggling with reading. And while they're in the scanner, they were seeing these kinds of things. So in the middle condition, they were simply deciding whether two letters like PP or DM were the same or different. So the two P's are the same, the D and M are different, right? So it's not a huge challenge for a 10-year-old. And then we wanted to think a little bit about sounds associated with print. So in the other condition, they saw like G and K, and had to answer whether the sounds of those letters, letter names, rhymed or not. So G and K end in different sounds, but T and D end in that E sound. Is that okay? So we're doing the very simplest, in a sense, way of linking sound to print. And what we found then, and other people have found as well. So here's the fMRI in 3 slices. In typical children, they activate these 2 spots, something near Broca's area, something posterior. You can see a lack of activation there and a somewhat displaced activation here in these 10-year-olds. And it's not that this tissue isn't plenty active, it's not differentially active from simply looking at a letter to move to then thinking about the sound that goes with the letter. Okay, something special, something about that special operation is not engaging this part of the brain, and children, 10-year-olds are struggling to read. Is that okay? Right. And their scores went up too, so not amazingly, but over a relative brief period, here's their scores on real word reading, on non-word decoding, and on passage comprehension was the smallest gain. That's often the hardest step, is to move from advances in single word processing to larger text. So this is a look from the side of the brain now. The 2 areas that were engaged in typical 10-year-old readers, the areas of lesser engagement in 10-year-olds who struggle with reading. And now, these are the 2 pictures you just saw, and here's the activation in children after the remediation. So I should tell you, this is not a randomized trial. These children were both getting the school support and the intervention. But
Can you go back the other one? Because I'm actually dyslexic, so it takes me a little longer.
Okay, let me stay on this one. Let me stay on this one, okay? So this is the typically reading children when they think about the sounds of print, activating something in the front and something in the back, in the left hemisphere, okay? These are the children who, with dyslexia, in the same spots, having either none or less response in those brain areas when they link the letter to the sound of the letter. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Now then, these are the same children after the intervention period. These are the same brains, same children, before picture, after picture. And now you can see a growth of response in those spots.
So much more than significant reading child.
Yeah, yeah.
Can I ask,
Yes.
for this particular study, what is the time?
How long was it think?
The
Was it about 8
abbreviation.
weeks?
I'm sorry?
8 weeks.
But it was done with fidelity.
It was done with fidelity, yes.
I mean, I think that's the key, right?
Yes, but let me go on because I have a twist coming up. All right. Here comes a spoiler alert. No, because when we saw this, first of all, let me just say, a cool thing about brain imaging, which has lots of limitations. If you're going to ask me what they are, I'll tell you them in a second. But a cool thing is it does make brain plasticity visible. It makes the effects of education and experience visible, right? And so I think it's very encouraging, you know, just at a human level to see what teaching can do. And, you know, if we did imaging with lots of landmark students, we would see that in every student's brain here, I believe, okay? I mean, it has to be. The mind is what the brain does. Effective education changes the brain. And so we knew that in theory, and now we know from many things, and here's one example, we can actually measure it objectively and visibly. And so I think that's just striking, and you know, Landmark, people are working in Landmark, oh, that's no big deal, we do that every day, you know, right? And you do it every day, and parents do it every day too in different ways. So, did I answer? Okay. I'm zoomed along a little bit, I'll slow down.
Okay.
So, but here's the twist for us in thinking about what happens, and again, different children will be incredibly variable. So these are the two spots you saw before, now just in a slightly different picture, okay? The growth of activation here. And then in the right hemisphere, which is not the predominant reading hemisphere in almost anybody who's a typically developing reader, look at these changes. These are changes. Huge in the right hemisphere, the non-reading hemisphere in most individuals, okay? And because we so much focused on, oops, sorry, let me go back. Because we so much focused on making typical, so to speak, the activation in the left hemisphere, because that's what we thought becoming a better reader was for somebody for whom reading does not come easily. We pay way too little attention to all this action, actually more of it in the right hemisphere. Does that make sense? Because we said, look, here's what intervention does. It gets you to use the part of the brain that everybody easily used. It's a little harder for you, but with the right educational support, you can do that. I don't know why this is spontaneously timing on my album. You know, so we just said, ooh, this is normalization. That is, just make it more like typical readers. And here is some compensation. We use that word just to have a word that's helping. But then, you know, yeah. But then we had another study where we where we took children who struggled to read and followed them with Hamiko Hack for 2.5 years, and said, what is it at the beginning for children who are struggling to read that best predicts who will make the most progress? Okay? Mm-hmm. And it turns out it was nothing in the left hemisphere. It was in the right frontal cortex. Okay? So this is a big surprise, but it aligned with the other findings. Does that make sense? So what we think is happening for the children who make the most progress is not that they're engaging the left hemisphere pathway that comes kind of naturally for 80–85% of children, but that they're finding another pathway through the right hemisphere that is the best thing for them. Mm-hmm. Is that okay? Does that make sense? So it's not there's variations on this, like you were asking about. You know, the children, they're not successful support. Often does not mean becoming like in the brain, in the mind, the same like people for children who reading was easier. Right. It means finding a way that works for you, and it can be distinctly different in the brain. So this is a big surprise, you know, for us, and it's a valuable thing. The more the children engage this, the more they would improve over the coming years. And so all this is aligned up with this idea that there's a right hemisphere pathway that's, you know, incredibly useful for many students. Not usually, not for 80% of people, they don't engage that, but for children who struggle to read, that might be the thing that much of intervention builds upon. Was there anything?
Yeah, so the left brain is considered for reading, and the right brain is considered for like math, or is there? Or is there any different? I mean, it's probably not a definition, but
yeah. So the left brain is dominant for spoken language. Okay. When we learn to read, there's an early phase in which there's a lot of evidence that we use the print areas in both the left and the right hemisphere when you learn to read initially. That's because when you learn to read initially, letters are like, they're not little signals of language, they're lines, exactly. Mm-hmm. You know, this is
drawings, yeah.
This is
Yeah,
yeah. The little and the little beginning reader, the very beginning reader. Is it a B? Is it a D? Is it a T? Is it a...
You look at like my dyslexic son is fascinated with Japanese.
Yeah.
And has taught himself Japanese, and and he's like, oh, it's so much easier. I'm like, okay.
I am amazed how what is easy for one person is difficult for another, and so many dimensions. I mean, right? But that so this is a huge twist that came out of brain imaging. That there's this other pathway, and then parents have sometimes asked me, okay, what or researchers, but what is going on in that part of the right frontal cortex? And I'm ashamed to say we don't really have much of an understanding, except that it's linked to better outcomes, and it's linked to effective interventions. So
I think piggybacking on what you were saying, like what primarily is the right?
Oh yeah, I didn't answer that question. Yeah, so it typically so what happens? Yeah, with print, it's originally it's in both sides of the brain, and then as you become a better reader, the left becomes dominant for print, because as you become a better reader, you're linking as much as possible print to language. Okay, and it's no longer a visual spatial puzzle. It's a visual spatial puzzle, just like you said at the beginning. This is partly why people have misunderstood the importance of letter reversals in dyslexia. One of the myths, as you might know, is that the thing that characterizes children with dyslexia. I know it's not held here, but for many people who are not near dyslexia, is that it's letter flipping. Everybody flips letters, and only slightly more, and maybe not even slightly more in dyslexia. Right? Everybody flips letters because at first the kids don't understand the letters. Okay, just like you said, it's a visual spatial challenge. The right hemisphere is dominant for visual spatial thought. Right hemisphere is dominant for, that includes, for example, recognizing faces, which is not a verbal process at all, right? Yeah, so for visual spatial thinking and for things like face recognition, for spoken language, the right hemisphere is dominant for intonation. When somebody says, "Oh, you think you're so smart," the sarcasm in that, because they're not really asking you whether you think how smart you really are. Right? So intonation, the music of language, so to speak, that's right hemisphere dominant as well. So musical things are right hemisphere dominant. When a musician becomes highly skilled and knows how to read notes and stuff like that, it becomes bilateral like language does, because now they have a formal representation through notes. And they think about music the way many of us think about language, right? Okay, it's like a formal organization. For those of us who just listen to music and like to sway with the music, don't know anything else, right hemisphere dominant. Is that okay? Yeah, so you get these shifts, as you formalize knowledge about something towards the left, including reading. Did I answer that okay? Yeah.
Can I ask a quick question too?
Sure.
So when we're talking with families here, when I'm running visits and talking about our profile and talking about WISC scores and looking at, so we always talk about how most of our kids here under that language-based dyslexic umbrella, that right hemisphere is a main strength for them, typically that visual, spatial, fluid reasoning, big picture thinking, integration, problem solving. So have there been studies that have looked at whether for a dyslexic child that there is more activation and stuff going on with the right hemisphere versus a non-dyslexic? Okay.
Yes, there is for reading, and it's kind of what I just showed you too. I mean, and especially for effective remediation, it's more on the right.
Yeah.
And the more you are on the right, it predicts further progress. As well. So all of that is very good. Okay. Yes. So what you're saying fits really nicely with the neuroscience, I think. And this is work from Gwendoline Eden. This is just, this is a conspiracy theory. At first, you're the only one who thinks this, and you go, like everybody else does, right? So you look back at here, this is Linda Mood-Bell, and here's the activations that are the changes, the products, okay? And you can see it's mostly on the right. And this isn't in adults, by the way. So I showed you children, this is adults. Something on the left, we used to think that was the big deal, the left, and now the big deal for the vast majority of children is the right, in the way that you've described as well. That the children are finding ways to build upon talents they have to leverage their reading ability. And so that, I think until these brain imaging pictures, and a number of them, so they thought it was in one fluky finding, I think we had no idea that it was that deep in the brain in terms of what effective educational support looks like. Should I do one last thing for
Oh,
How am I
yeah.
on my time?
Oh, you're fine.
Okay, all right. Because I want to share one other program we read in the summer. So, you know, there's a really interesting thing. I'm really impressed by decoding dyslexia. I have to say, my interactions with decoding dyslexia. I know whenever you get into these topics, it can be a challenge, but I'm really, it's pretty amazing that with all the complexity of things, there's a whole bunch of states now that are requiring screening for dyslexia in kindergarten. But you know that in Massachusetts it's coming as well. I went to a meeting where they're starting to say, like, what will the state Department of Education recommend to the schools for how to screen? Because a lot, as you know, I think it's a good idea to screen a lot, but the impact of it will depend a lot on how it's screened for exactly, right? You know, it's always you know, so we're really interested in thinking about these early children and getting them into programs. And so let me show you, we talked about gray matter and white matter. Here's a measure we can do of gray matter, which is just simply looking at so this is just a structural MRI from year to year. But in addition, just to sort of looking at it that way, we can actually go in there and look at these sort of slice by slice of the brain and quantify the thickness of the cortex. You know, so we have a number that goes to characterize the brain anatomy. So we moved to gray matter anatomy. And you know, I mentioned to you the challenges before of bringing a scientific lens to educational interventions. And so one approach that we've kind of liked, and it's got its huge limitations, is our intensive summer programs for children who otherwise don't have something available. Because we can do, before and after, we can do measures on them, their minds and their brains, and then give them some sort of interventional support. And so we did this study in collaboration with Linda Mudell. And here's something that every parent and every teacher knows, which is the very same instructional approach that works for some children does not work as well for others. I mean, this will be true of almost everything in life. But you know, when we publish a scientific paper saying something works, that's true, but you wouldn't mind knowing for whom it works. Is that okay? And it's almost never done that way. It's just that's not the way we do science. We go like, it worked or it didn't work. That's, you know. And so I'm just making a hypothetical picture here where, you know, 0 would be no change. A program didn't help a child become a better reader. You know, here's the individual score. So on average, it went up a little bit, but some people didn't benefit from it so much. And we would love to have, you know, and I'm sure good schools and good teachers have lots of good feelings and experiences about how to approach different children. But we would love to have a science that goes with that. And we're far from that. Okay, we're far from personalized or precision educational things. That a child comes in, we go, ooh, we know something about you, and you need this program, not that program, right? And that would be awesome if we could get there. And by the way, it's not just reading difficulties. It's everything with human behavior is that way. Okay, everything is like we have one approach. Works sometimes, doesn't work other times, and we don't know if it will work or not. So it's not just education and reading interventions. So in this study, we had 65 first and second graders with reading disability. We gave them 6 weeks with 100 hours, a total of small group intervention in the summer. Had 25, we had a control group now, 25 students were randomly put into a group that didn't get Linda Mood-Bell in the summer, but got to go in the fall. So sometimes when people will say, gee, what's the long-term benefit of any of these programs? And of course that's what matters. From a scientific viewpoint, it's really hard to do that because we couldn't have asked families to participate if they got nothing out of it, right? Okay. So everybody got Linda Mood-Bell, but once the controls get it in the fall, after the summer, you know, we can't tell anymore what really happened because they're all, does that make sense? Okay. And we did one other thing, which is we were able, through partnerships with schools, to have what for us was a more diverse set of families in terms of family income and education than we typically are able to get. I won't tell you more about it now, but we have a huge push in trying to understand the intersection between learning differences and the environment in which children grow, or both. Because we think, you know, and I'll tell you why in a moment for this group. And so here's what we found. So here's the 25 children who were the waiting control summer children, and all their scores went down. Okay, this is where they started. This is the end of the summer. So losing on standardized tests of reading. So that's bad, right? These are children who came to us, their parents came to us because their kids were struggling in school. They're behind already. And then they went through a formal evaluation process with Tower and Woodcock-Johnson and all that kind of stuff that you're used to. So we know they were bad readers. It wasn't just the parents who were like overly ambitious to read. And their scores go down. And this is, people have words for this: summer slump, summer loss, you know, and it's especially pernicious for children who are already behind in reading to go down even more before they go back to school. Then we looked at the children who got the intervention. Their scores on average stayed the same. So compared to children who got nothing, it's a benefit, but we would have liked to see scores go up, not just stay the same, although it's still better than doing no intervention, right? But within them, there were two groups kind of. There was a subset, about half the kids actually went up, about half the kids looked like the kids who got nothing. So this is this idea again that, you know, there's profound individual variation, and the very same program that works for these kids did nothing for these kids, right? So I can tell you that Linda Moubel, it was kind of good news, it was a glass half full, right? So because you like it to work for everybody, it did work for half the children, which is a meaningful number of children. It didn't work so well for the other.
Can I ask a question about that?
Absolutely,
just in terms of rate of progress, and you're talking about that right and left. So was there any investigation or looking at, for the kids that did make a lot more progress, or where the program was more effective, if they had stronger right hemisphere abilities?
We did not see that. We did not see that this time.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I was just wondering, again,
that would be. I know that would be. We did not see
like
that this time, but I think because we looked at a much more diverse student sample, I think we got into a wider set of issues. Okay. Than we typically have had.
Okay.
So in this situation, and there's a lot of ways you could think about it, the children who had the biggest, best predictor by far was family income. Children who came from lower income families had the most response. And children who came from higher income families had less response. There's a lot of ways to think about it. We don't have a scientific answer.
Okay, so that was surprising to me. So
yes.
Children who came from lower income families had more response
yes.
to the intervention?
Yes. That was
I could see that though,
well,
because
they
probably
weren't getting any.
We've been giving something all along.
You could spin the story both ways. Honestly, this is you know, this is we get the data and then we spin the story, right? As best we can interpret. So the
take your time. Take your time.
Yeah, I'm good. So one version is exactly what you said, which is where we fell on, because that's the way that you know, which is children who come from more supported environments. You know, they've gone as far as they can in many ways by the support they've gotten. Okay, and then another couple of months of Linda, another 100 hours. You know, it's not going to make that much difference. Okay, I mean, I have to say that both students from Landmark and students from Carroll, we work a lot with Carroll as well. Yeah, often they don't qualify as dyslexic in a research study, which is, you know, awesome, right?
Maybe.
No, it's because the schools have done great things and parents have done great things. But you know, there's been a lot of support.
Right.
And you know, yeah.
On the other, so Dylan came here and we didn't know if Landmark was going to work. I mean, he came here with very low school skills, like knowing half the alphabet, didn't know how to write his name going into 3rd grade. And we have noticed, he's in 9th grade now, and we're, you know, if you have him read, it's not automatic. It's very monotone. It's very struggling. It's very much, and he's been here 7 years.
So you're
it's not fluent.
Yes. So here's a unbelievable challenge from a science perspective, a family perspective, a student perspective, which is we understand a fair bit scientifically and from research about single word reading, right? The kinds of stuff that you think about Woodcock-Johnson or Tower or something like that, the kind of stuff that people look at. That is the first step in reading in many ways, right? And there's a robust set of scientific findings about things that help that, and schools like Landmark build on that. Is that okay?
Yeah.
I
mean, he's made tremendous progress.
Yes.
It's just not. Yeah. But we have seen, I mean, like, it's. Yes. I don't know that he's going to be a fluent reader.
Yeah. And so here's the my understanding, and you know, others will have different experiences and know different things than I do. We have no scientific understanding of how to enhance fluency. I mean, like none. Because fluency is such a, probably in part because it's such a complicated measure of a process. It's like everything. It's like saying like being an awesome person or something. Are we gonna have? I'm being a little silly, but or like, are we gonna have a measure of awesomeness? And you're gonna go, no, because that's not complicated. Okay, so fluency is more specific, and it's more specific, but it's like got everything in it. It's like the interpretation of the text, the processing of the print, the blah blah. So so it's been really hard, and I know for Carol too. That's their number one thing because they feel like they can make tremendous progress on the single word decoding.
Yeah.
And all the science is there, and that centers around really the reading challenges of beginner readers, right? And as you hit middle school and high school and beyond, there's no science, there's just efforts and accommodations, and good teachers and parents are supportive, and students doing their best and that's where we are from a scientific perspective, yeah. And I completely agree. That's why, so we see the students who come in from Landmark or Carroll, and they're acing, or pretty much, the single word stuff after a few years, which is awesome actually, because if that's really hard, then everything else that follows after that. But
those GORT scores might still be low. Like so I work with a lot of the kids that transition from Carroll to Landmark for high school, and what we see is, you're right, like on the pseudo word, nonsense word, and bill word, they've gotten there, but we'll still see like really low GORT scores with reading,
they're just, no, I went to another school, Odyssey, outside Baltimore, if you've heard that one, but one teacher said, this has always stuck with me, that there's intervention or remediation, or whatever you want to call it, in the early grades. After that, it's all accommodation, and by that you mean just people trying to figure out what works best for them one way or another, without any systematic path on that, individually.
Because there's comprehension, like for Dylan, my son, he has comprehension, but it's just you see the effort that is put into reading and integrating. It's difficult.
It's laborious for many students, even when they're single word decoding becomes quite impressive.
I'm glad this came up because this is my question for today. In terms of the different kinds of dyslexia, you heard double deficit.
Yes.
I was just saying to Catherine, I have like PTSD from this room when they gave me the scores for my son when he got into admissions. I just cried, and I got in the car. I said, "Just send the check." I just literally was.
And you're a reading teacher, right?
Yes, I am a reading specialist, so it's some sort of sick joke on me. My mother says he was born to me for a reason, but. So anyway, my question is, when my son came here, his C-top scores were, you went over the C-top, were all below average, and so he came in second grade. He did repeat kindergarten, but they were all below average, and Landmark does LIPS, Linda Mubel, so you were talking about that. So soon after he was here, when he had like a year and a half, he had his second like his C-top. He's all average and above average on his C-top scores, except for one, the illusion. But everything else, it was like, it's just incredible. But it's still every word, and he just started reading. And so then when he had his next neuropsych, they said he had phonological dyslexia, which seems to be remediated, but also visual dyslexia, or it has a few names.
Dysadetic.
Yes, and his GORT scores are still extremely low. So I've tried to do some research on that kind of dyslexia, and I still don't really understand it and what that means, and the remediation for that sort of visual dyslexia. And do you know anything about that?
I don't. I'm sorry to say. No. I'm really sorry. I don't. And then the teachers here, the educators here.
When I talked to Landmark, they said, "Well, we're still going to remediate the way we remediate here." But I was just.
The thing is, I'll just say this is an opinion now. This is not as a scientist, okay?
Yeah.
I think my observation has been that that Landmark does everything it possibly can, amazingly, and in supporting children. But we just don't know these other things that you're asking. I mean, they're so fundamental. How do we get fluency up? How do we deal with variation in the basis of reading difficulty? What if it includes a visual thing? There is no really known scientific path to say, in terms of education, to say, oh, your child has this pattern, do this thing, okay? And I have discussions with clinicians who I hugely respect, because they, and they go like, we evaluate the kid and tell them what kind of thing they help. And I go like, well, how do you know that helps? I'm sorry, I'm a researcher from MIT, right? How do you know that? And they go, like, we don't know that, but it makes sense, doesn't it? And of course, well, a lot of the world has to operate like that. We get up in the morning and we do stuff. A lot of it just, it makes sense, you know. Not everything has to be scientifically validated, or but it would be awesome if we could do that, but we're just not there yet. So some people are worried that there's too much emphasis on phonological awareness because they don't talk about the fluency or aspects of the deafness deficit. But that's the place where we know, I think, scientifically, and educators know what to do to help us having to deal with it. I'd like 2 more slides. Should I do those 2 and then 2 connecting? Is it? I feel bad. Let me do 2 more slides just to finish this one. I'm good. Okay. Actually, this is 1 more slide. So I just want to show you. Yeah, we didn't get that prediction. I think it's because it might be more complicated when we have more diverse families in terms of background. But we did get this. So this is looking at brain anatomy and shifts in brain anatomy, the thickness of the cerebral cortex. These are the 25 kids who got nothing. Their brain didn't change. Actually, to the extent it changed at all, which is not significantly statistical, the cortex gets thinner. You may know this already, but from about age 5 until about 25 and 22, your cerebral cortex gets thinner. It's the only part of you that gets smaller systematically from 5 to 22. The white matter grows in size. The gray matter thins in size, and that's understood to be, we don't know 100% with certainty, but from animal work, that's understood to be the strategy that what you do is you're born with way too many neurons and connections, and that somehow your brain decides, it's the ultimate survivor show, which neurons and connections are useful, and the others literally wither away. There's millions of neurons and connections that are lost through adolescence, as the neurons that seem to be powerful, useful, are selected and kept. So that's the thinning of the cortex. The white matter grows. Anyway, so these kids, it's slightly thin, but it's only, only a summer, so it wasn't statistically significant. These are the kids who took the Linda Moon Bell program, Seeing Stars in this case, and didn't benefit from the program. They have no change. These are the thickening of the cortex that occurred in the children who did benefit from the program. So, I wish we could align it with the right hemisphere story. We didn't, but it just shows you beautifully that effective education changes the brain. Ineffective education, unfortunately, has not changed the reading. Yeah.
Does it stay?
Okay, so this we don't know. and
does it stay? I mean, it's for like 8 weeks.
So why? One of the many reasons why a place like Landmark is so valuable is that you're continuing with the students year to year, right? As long as a good fit for them, right? Whenever we have this research thing, this is controlled, there's a randomized control group, all that kind of stuff, that's for the summer. And then they all go back to, in this one especially, because of the diverse students, they go back to schools that are terrific, schools that have, with very limited resources, okay, are not terrific. So it's very hard for us to tell, the one thing that we know in education research is there's this phrase, washout effects. Almost nothing, if we were to say a principle, stays without further support, And some people go like, well, then it's no good. And you go like, well, what is it? You can't go to the gym twice a year in January, although gyms make all their money then, right? You can't go to the gym twice a year in January and say like, does that affect stay? I'm like, you're right. You can't. You're trying to eat healthy. You can't eat healthy, on Saturdays only. And say, does that affect stay for the rest of the week, right? So the question you're asking is great, but we always, especially for reading, such a core part of education, it's very hard for us to scientifically track people, because they go back to differential school environments, differential home environments, some of which are amazingly supportive and some of which are not. And that's disproportionately true for kids who come from low-income families. The last thing, I feel like I was talking about the screening for dyslexia. I think one of the really interesting things that will come up is there'll be a very large number of kids from low-income families who will score on tests of reading or pre-reading like children who come from highly supported environments but have that difference that leads to dyslexia, right? And I think schools are very worried about it. This is why actually they've often resisted these kind of evaluation. They're afraid there's going to be too many kids who look like they're struggling at reading. Okay? Be slightly political for 1 second, I'll stop with that. I would say all those kids need help. It's the wrong thing to say if we don't measure it, you know, we don't have to deal with it, right? Yeah, yeah. And there'll be kids who struggle with reading because of this genetic brain difference that could be a benefit in some ways, but is a difficulty for reading. There's other kids who may not have that thing, but they might have very low exposure to language and books and things like that. And you know, all of them need. I don't think the schools need to sort out. The schools don't need to sort out whether reason that the kids are struggling to read. They just need to figure out how to have resources to help all these kids make progress, right? It might be different for different kinds of kids when that support will be. So there were some hands in. I'm done. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier about we all know that dyslexia is not letter flipping.
Yeah.
My son, however, if he was trying to the alphabet from A to Z, he would flip anything that he can flip, he'd nearly flip it. But it also
at what age?
He would like.
At what age was he flipping?
Oh, sorry, he is about to turn 9 actually.
Okay.
Yeah. Beyond that, then he also does it with numbers. So I'm curious, for everything you've said today about reading, does it apply to reading numbers and what happens in the brain with numbers?
So here's how we understand the flipping thing to be, and and I'll say two things about it. So we know a little bit. So one thing is the reason that many people flip, and then some learn not to, okay, in many cases, is because we understand our object recognition. Our brains were not evolved for digits or print. Those are recent inventions, right?
Okay.
So whatever our brains evolved to do, mostly to recognize objects, you know, like there's an animal, there's a rock, and for there, it's considered an incredible power of our visual system to be what they call viewpoint independent. You know, that is, let's pick this. If I hold it this way, and then I turn it this way, you don't go, wow, that was a remote control. What is that? I have no idea. No, and for people who do, at MIT, there's a lot of computer vision. For machines, it's non-trivial. For you, it's trivial, right? You go like, I can recognize it in all these forms, right? Yeah. For machines, machines get thrown off, okay? So that's what we're born with, to be brilliant at this. Turns out to be a problem for letters and digits because they have to face a certain way to make sense. Is that okay? Yeah. So that's why everybody's a flipper, okay? And we've done some research showing that even if you challenge a little bit, even teenagers or typical readers, they are more sensitive to, more prone to flip than an adult reader. So it's a long, slow process to tamp down in your brain the natural tendency to treat everything the same, left or right, up or down, and say, no, but for letters and for words, and for letters and for digits, right? So for some reason, I can't know, you know, I think that process doesn't play out as strongly in some children, but it starts with this brain bias to flip everything, okay? And there's a strength for everything except letters and digits.
Okay.
But I can't say more than that.
Yes, okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So I have two questions. The first is, at what age, is there an age where you can administer the CTOT successfully, like a cutoff age for early testing?
And there's people in this room who knows better than I do. The youngest
kindergarten, that's what I've, like around kindergarten.
Yeah, around pre I think even some versions of it in pre-K.
Yeah.
My second question was, are there any studies on remediation of adults, like adults that may have never learned to read at all?
Yes.
Oh, good question.
Yes. In fact, that's been so one of the there's been a couple of very striking studies of taking people from remote cultures where they haven't had formal education and then teaching some to read as adults. And that's scientifically of interest from a science viewpoint because children are constantly changing, okay? So if you try to understand what is learning to read, how does learning to read change your brain? Children are not the best study examples from that from a scientific thing because they're learning to read, but they're developing in 1,000 other ways every day, okay? So when you see their brain change, why did it change? Was it the reading? Was it the social interaction? Was it the math? Was it the parenting? You know, right? So you could scientifically isolate how reading changes the brain in an adult who's never read before. And they've shown in these adults brain changes, the growth of an area that responds to print. It eats away at the area in these adults who never read that recognizes faces in the left hemisphere. It's like there's a limited amount of space, so if you were using it for faces because you never had to have print, it eats away at that left hemisphere. So yeah, so people have shown that, and they do gain reading skill. My guess is it's never as strong as somebody's been reading for 30 years, but they do definitely gain reading skill without having ever been exposed to print or education.
Huh.
Any other questions?
I have a couple questions.
Okay.
Really quick. One is, from a scientific point of view, only because I know whether we want to admit it or not, we're the privileged people here in this workroom that are at Landmark. Why wouldn't you set up a school in, like, say, India with the rag children who have never been exposed, but those parents wouldn't care whether one person was getting, you know, lips and one group wasn't? Would you ever entertain that idea?
I think that'd be an awesome idea.
I have an actual friend who does that, not with dyslexic kids, but he's a successful contractor, and he goes there 2 months out of a year, and he's set up schools for these kids, and kids are fun. People here are funding these rag children.
I think that could be a fantastic idea. You know,
because you think about the brain,
Yeah.
they haven't been exposed to. My other question is this. I have a Landmark student here who's famous for telling me about these Harvard studies, and that's why he should, you know, have earbuds in, hanging over his ears while he's doing his homework, because studies show that kids with ADHD perform better when they're listening to music. You know, ADHD/dyslexic kids perform better. Is that true? Is that true? And everybody in the room wants to know that too.
You know, I don't know. So now,
I'm bringing this home.
We do a fair bit of work on ADHD and the overlap between ADHD and but I haven't heard about that study.
I think he might be making that one.
He needs to produce that study for you.
He wants that.
There is a little bit of a literature I've heard, and I can't swear to this, but I've heard this from a couple of semi-reliable sources.
Yeah.
So I have to go look this up to be certain that I'm telling the truth. So here's what I hear is that if it's anything verbal in the environment, that's always going to be bad. You know, so for studying purposes, TikTok, TV on, okay? For some people, having music actually helps them focus more on the thing in front of them, as long as it's
but without words.
Nonverbal music. Nonverbal music.
So like Bach.
That's
what we're talking here.
Bach, or, you know,
or even like Japanese, like so, like Dylan listens to Japanese.
What is it with this Japanese thing?
I'm not even sure. I'm not even sure that words in a song matter that much if it's a familiar song. I mean, you know, we don't.
Right.
You know, you're not really listening to the content after the first time you hear it, right? It's just like stuff that goes with the music.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, you know, I think there is something to support that can help people focus. Partly because it maybe just drowns out any other source of distraction. It's better to have that known and controlled distraction, okay, than it is to have other sources of distraction that are more random and effectively more distracting. So I've heard that a little bit, and I think that might be.
He heard a little something too.
Yeah.
There's two. Yes.
Just a comment on that. I'm a psychologist and suffer of ADHD, and have a little bit of sort of experience. And having a distraction that is well known and is something that is not new actually works with ADHD, because as the cycles are, you're looking for distractions. Watching an old movie, for example, that you know what the words are, you know what's going to happen, allows you to take a cycle, go to that, but come right back and not get caught up with it, so that all of those distractions don't pull you away like a shiny butterfly.
So that kind of goes with this, which is right. It depends on what the source.
That's right. That's right.
Thank you for that expertise.
Exactly right.
Yeah. So you're supporting this idea that it depends on what it is a lot, and if it's something you're familiar with, it could actually help you to avoid other sources of distraction.
The strategy is to figure out a way for the brain who's looking for other cycles not to get caught up in one of those. Yeah. And that only happens with familiar stuff. Yeah. But if it's brand new, if it's brand new music, it's a brand new movie, you're dead.
Yeah.
No, it's not. It's always like
the same stuff.
It's always the same. He loves worship music, like, because we're Christians, and he plays this worship music constantly while he's doing his stuff. It's like pre-cal.
Yeah.
I'm like, how can you do pre-cal and like? But he says it helps.
When I do
them.
statistical analysis, it's the same thing. Is that?
See, it's the mathematics, but it's not.
What it's doing is it's a coping mechanism to control the cycles of distraction.
I mean, you see the same thing in TV shows. Like with surgeons, will have some background music, right? And they're doing something pretty important, and I think they're pretty eager to do the best job they can. They're not.
Right.
So it might be a broader thing. The right kind of thing can help a person focus in. Was there one last one?
Katie has.
Just one
Yeah.
quick question. With your, in the beginning of your presentation, when you did the MRIs on toddlers and
Yeah.
indeed staking it to infants, if you are seeing any differences in the brain, what kind of activities are you doing with those kids? Or are you to have them better catch up or remediate at an early age, or is it something that you do need to wait until that kind of fall kindergarten when they should, when there's those targeted deadlines or dates
Interventions.
right? Is there something that you
Are there
do with them
interventions earlier?
earlier than the kindergarten?
Yeah, that's a great question, because if you could intervene before the child goes to school, maybe when they arrive at school, it's a better start, right?
Mhm.
I'm not aware
Okay.
of any research on that front, and I completely agree with you that would be terrific. I mean, you have
I
a
just
2-year-old
didn't
at
know.
home, their schedule is pretty flexible. Could you, that would
Doing
be,
those rhyming
that would be,
activities and that you touched upon in there, the
so,
language thing.
so like a speech and language, that intervention can help.
I will say one thing, and sorry, I know we're going late, also,
No, it's fine. Go ahead.
It's certain, exposure to print is certainly good for everybody. And we have done some studies showing that back and forth conversations between parents and kids hugely helps their language system and preparedness to read. We could show know both behaviorally and in the brain. There's evidence for both. So those are not specialized. Those are not distinct. Those are not different. That research for children at risk versus not at risk for reading difficulty. But across sort of everybody that's been looked at, the more they're read to, and the more they have these back and forth conversations with either considerably older siblings or parents or grandparents, the important thing is that it's an older person compared to the child, and that it's contingent conversation, that it's back and forth conversation, and that you're talking with your 2-year-old, your 3-year-old, your 4-year-old in a way that makes sense to them. Okay, and that has incredibly powerful effects on language development. And we don't know that it's disproportionate in any way for a child at risk, but it seems to be beneficial for everybody.
It takes two to talk. No, that's the name of the program. It takes two to talk. For younger kids, it goes along that line. It's a Canadian company, but for younger kids, I mean, I'm not saying that those kids are all identified as, but those kids are all identified as having some sort of language deficits, and that's kind of like a parenting program that can be done, and that's like turn taking and robust language.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
John, thank you so much. We appreciate it. I just want to let everybody know that typically we open the school store after these meetings. We're not able to do that today, so the store is closed. So I don't want anyone to go up the windy hill and find that. Also, today's event has been recorded and will be available on our YouTube stream, so we'll share that with our parents afterwards, but you're able to share that as you like. And John, thank you for allowing us to do that, and we so appreciate you being here. Thank you so much.
I have the live recording. Here comes out there. Stop.